We're live now.
Okay, thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Khalid Al from AionDigital, and I'll be your host today, and very happy to be moderating this interesting topic today. So let's give a couple of minutes for the audience to join, and we will kickstart in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much. All right, I think we are good to make a start. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. Um, I am Khalid Al from AionDigital, and I'm very happy to be part of this interesting discussion today. So thank you very much for making the time and joining us. Please enjoy the discussion, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So please feel free to post your question at the Q&A section, and we would address those questions by our guest today at the end of this session. Digital identity. I think as individuals, we identify ourselves in many different ways. We give our name, address, age, profession, and many others. And traditionally, we use different, many forms, and we see this identity in many forms. On the driving license, the ID card, the birth certificate, work badges, and these are the identity instruments. But in the digital world, it has the same purpose, but it happens in a different shape and form. But absolutely, the purpose remains the same. But the question is really, how do we identify ourselves and how it works? And how does that help end users, individuals, institutions in the digital economy? Where do we stand today, for example, on the adoption rate and what's happening on the rest of the world? Do we stand at par when it comes to the development and the adoption? Are we far behind? Lots of things, and this topic is absolutely very big to address that in 1 hour. So we thought of focusing on and zooming into the digital identity today in the context of digital onboarding. And to answer all of those questions, I'm very happy to have an expert panel today to address and to deep dive into this area. Please welcome Shariq Nazim, the co-founder and CTO of AionDigital, and Colin O'Neill, the vice president from Daon company. And we have Latifa Al Mutawa, the head of eKYC from the Benefit company in Bahrain. So let me start with giving a quick introduction just for the benefit of the audience. for everyone. A couple of minutes, quick introduction, then we will start the discussion. Please, Shariq, can we start with yourself?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shariq Nazim. I'm the co-founder and CEO of AionDigital. Been in the industry for about 25 years, in the region for about 6 years. Since 2017, have been associated with Aion, busy in changing how banking is done within the GCC. That's me.
Thank you very much, Shariq. Colin, would you go second?
Sure. Thank you, Khaled. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Colin O'Neill, and I'm the Vice President of Sales for a company called Daon, based here in Dublin, in Ireland. We've been partnered with AionDigital for the last number of years, very successful partnership, and we enjoy working with all those guys in the region, supplying solutions, addressing customer inquiries, and essentially shoring up the digital onboarding, eKYC, and biometric authentication knowledge base in the region. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you very much, Colin. Latifa, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Khalid, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, allow me to thank AionDigital for inviting me to this distinguished webinar with our esteemed speakers, Mr. Shariq and Mr. Colin. This is Latifa Al Mutawa. I am head credit bureau service and the eKYC service in Benefit company, and I'm a risk management professional. I have been practicing risk management and banking for the past 16 years. For those who doesn't know Benefit, Benefit is the Bahrain network for financial transactions. It's a private company that was established back in 1997, and it's licensed by the Central Bank of Bahrain as an ancillary service provider. I think it's well known for their operation of the switch service for ATMs and POS. It is also operating multiple national services, I would say, like the credit bureau, the electronic fund transfer, the payment gateway, the eKYC, which I will be elaborating about, the wages protection system, and of course, you all know Benefit Pay. So I would say Benefit was one of the pioneers in fintech in Bahrain, providing infrastructure and financial transactions in the kingdom.
Thank you very much, Latifa, and absolutely, we're very happy to have you on board today, and we would love to hear more about the Benefit and the recent developments happening out in the market. So let me start with breaking down this whole webinar into 3 sections. I think let's start with understanding the digital identity when it comes to the context of digital onboarding. Then we would love to focus more on the field play of this area, and maybe the last theme, let's talk about what's next. What shall we expect as the next step in this area? Shariq, if I may start with yourself and ask you to share your perspective on the impact of the digital onboarding in this context, please.
Thank you, Khalid. Thank you, team. It's a very interesting question. Let me break this question down into 3 key components. And I think that's how we will appreciate the importance of digital identity, right? We need to understand what is going on today, right? What is digital identity up against? Number 1. Number 2, then I'll talk about the impact of digital identity in some use cases, such as digital onboarding. And then I'll talk about what is beyond onboarding, where digital identity can be deployed, and the importance of that mechanism. So what are we up against? Why did we come up, or the world came up with a concept called digital identity, right? We are up against something which is called a phenomena, which is physical identity, right? What is that? Where banks are actually forcing the customers to come to the branch to open accounts and to do any banking services that they can offer through digital channels, right? So that is what we are up against. Now, what happens? Let's take a very simple example where we can all relate to it, right? So you get a call from your bank, says, you need to come to the branch. So you take time out of your working hours and you go to the branch. And it's, according to one of the surveys, it's about 30 to 45 minutes where you need to wait before you get access to the bank's representative, right? What happens then, once you reach to that step, you are then given long forms to fill, And then there is a large set of documentation that is required, which in 90% of the cases, either the documentation request is not clear or misunderstood, which means a second trip is then needed, right? So this whole phenomena of bringing the customers to the branch comes with a lot of excess luggage, right? A lot of excess baggage here. And that's why organizations, digital entities, the ecosystem within the world, well, they came up and said, this needs to change. And hence the, the concept of digital identity was born, right? I mean, that is what we are up against. Now, having understood that, what does that mean? That really means is, instead of you and I going to the bank for any services, we should be doing the services or banking from the comfort of our own house, through the mobile, through the app, right? Now, easier said than done. It comes with its own challenges. You need to protect your identity, right? Because now you are not going to the bank physically. So you are doing things on the mobile, which opens up a lot of questions around how will you manage fraud? How will you protect the identity? How will you, because now you're doing things digitally, so you have a footprint, digital footprint. How will you maintain that identity, right? And that's where organizations such as Daon, for example, comes in, and Benefit, who have applied in addition to what Aion is doing, uh, and come up with very strong biometric authentication mechanism to protect the digital identity of you and me, right, as customers. So, number one, we are moving away from the physical identity to digital identity, where you are providing convenience and superb customer experience, at the same time managing the fraudulent or potential fraudulent activities that could go wrong, and people can steal your identity. And if that happens, obviously it can get a bit messy. And that's why when we go to the central banks with our partner banks to get approvals on such innovation, we are demonstrating the additional controls over and beyond what the current branch network offers, right? So, for example, selfie recognition, biometric authentication, cross validation between OCR and MRZ data sets, etc., etc. So, there are a number of additional controls that come into place. Now, the third aspect to this is, how does it apply, right? Yes, we understand what digital identity is, the benefit, but how does it apply? So we start, I mean, any customer who is trying to do banking starts with opening a bank account, right? And that is the first impression that he or she gets when he opens an account. Within that process, obviously, digital identity is a very important aspect, because at that stage, you are defining and building the digital footprint of your customer, right? And hence, at that point of time, you capture that identity. Now, it is being used during the onboarding journey and during the onboarding process, but it doesn't end there. That is only the beginning, right? Anything, and I'll answer this in detail in terms of the evolution of digital identity, but I think it has it is a game changer when it comes to employing digital identity concept within the onboarding space, where you are asking or requesting your customers that you don't need to come to the branch. You can open your account from the convenience of your home. You can do your post onboarding services uh, from the convenience of your home as well. But at the same time, we are also maintaining that balance, that fine balance between an over controlled environment, what we call, and the superb customer experience, right? You don't want to over control the environment and destroy the customer experience either. So it's a very thin line between saying we want to innovate, we want to build that innovation, we want to go through we want to give that experience to the customer. At the same time, we want to satisfy all the underlying regulatory concerns, which protects the identity of your customer, right? That is a very, very important concept here. So just to summarize, the world is moving away from physical identity to digital identity to give that superior customer experience. At the same time, we are talking about how do we ensure that identity is protected with the underlying controls, and that is where we are partnering with organizations such as Benefit and Daon to bring that overall ecosystem to provide that convenience to our customers. I hope that
Very
answers
interesting.
provided clarity
Very,
there.
very interesting, Shariq. And thank you for bringing such a practical experience, example, just to link the entire concept of the digital identity. And it's quite a big topic when it comes to the conceptual part of it, and then the different use cases. So I think we all have witnessed, and right now we can see the strong shift when it comes to the digital or the virtual life. I think previously, if I was about to visit any institution, I would have to, at least at the reception, to prove who I am or to present an ID. And without that, I can't access that building or that institution. Right now, I think we have done that in a different form and shape to access this virtual room, right? So I think it's all connected, as you rightly said, and it's important to bring that, the drivers and the different stakeholders to fulfill when it comes to regulatory framework versus the customer satisfaction, the individuals, the end users, as well as the institutions, and bringing this, comprehensive overall context around how do we best use the digital identity to reach to the desired achievement. So Colin, I think that's quite a nice shift. Let me move to yourself when it comes to background and experience. What's happening around the world when it comes to the development, the advancement of such digital identity in the context of the onboarding?
Sure, thank you, Khaled. As Shariq very eloquently explained, digital identity is a broad space, a rapidly evolving space as well, especially with the social restrictions that have all been placed on us by COVID and this pandemic. So having a robust eKYC process coupled with strong authentication, biometric where possible, is very important in order to serve this increased digital channel usage that we're seeing, or adoption. Because of this rapid adoption, really the scale is huge. We're seeing good advancements coming. So we're seeing acceleration in the innovation space in digital identity, specifically in the eKYC components, which are identity proofing, essentially, identity establishment, gathering identity data, and also in the authentication space, using that identity data to authenticate customers, applicants, people when they access an online service from a financial institution. So there's a lot going on there, but from our perspective in Daon, for those who don't know, we're a 20-year-old company providing digital identity assurance solutions to governments and financial institutions and beyond for the last 20 years. So we're quite mature in this space. And we have a significant R&D department, which are always looking at innovation and new capabilities, either building our own or looking at the market to see some interesting things that are happening. Some of those I'll go through. I can't cover everything, obviously, in a few minutes, but some of the most interesting ones that we see would start with the recent opening up of near-field communications, NFC, by the device vendors. Some of you might know Android have had this capability exposed for years, and Apple recently opened theirs up. What that allows us to do, and what that adds to the eKYC journey, is the ability to electronically communicate with an identity document. So an e-passport, an e-ID, for example, rather than the traditional approach of using surface level analysis of a white light image, basically a photograph taken by applicants with their phone, we can now use that photograph to communicate directly with the document and validate the data that's digitally stored on an identity document. And this is a great control in combating fraud through potential synthetic documents and fraudulent IDs and such, as they won't have this digital capability. And it's key in shifting customers and organizations from a data-centric approach to a more document-centric ID assurance process. And we're very happy to see these kinds of advancements. And these are coming from the device vendors. So as third-party vendors of solutions, we are just leveraging the capabilities of the devices, which is where, on a yearly shift, most of the advancements in this space tend to reside. Now, we won't see the immediate benefits of that for a few years, because not every document has this NFC capability and not every phone supports it. but it is becoming more widespread year on year. And we could always fall back to the surface level analysis of the document as well. But a lot of potential in the NFC for eKYC and authentication and beyond. Other areas that are important, and we've seen a lot of advancements, would be in what we call liveness detection or anti-spoofing capabilities. So for talk's sake, imagine you're capturing a selfie. Well, as a financial institution governed by a regulator, you have to ensure that that person is a live person. They're not an image, they're not a video, they're not a deep fake or any of those kinds of things. So we as vendors have to provide strong and frictionless solutions to our customers, banks essentially, to supply to your end users. And what that is essentially a range of capabilities for detecting what we call spoofing. Now, we've also seen the emergence of independent certification bodies in recent years who provide robust testing and approval of solutions in this space. So what that means for financial institutions, that it levels the playing field in a somewhat sophisticated space. You have assurance from an independent third-party body that the liveness detection or anti-spoofing capabilities are tested and certified. And you also are able to drive your requirements around it rather than being dependent on what the vendor is telling you they can do. You have proof essentially of how this anti-spoofing capability works. In our own instance, for example, we have a method which we call three-dimensional face liveness, and it involves a very small movement of a device while taking the selfie, and we can determine from that the person is alive, the facial orientation has changed, various different things. It's a very low bar for successful passing of the capability for your users, which means your customer experience is better, but it's also a strong and certified liveness check, which your regulators will approve of too. On the other end of that process, then we have the facial matching. So you have a selfie, you're assured it's a real person. Now you have to match it to something, and that could be a stored image from the document. It could be the digital image from the NFC if available. It could even be a third-party trusted source like the origin, the document issuer, the passport issuer, if that's available. So matching algorithms are increasing in performance and confidence exponentially, mainly due to the emergence of big data analysis techniques, machine learning, deep neural networks, and so on. So finally, the last space I thought would be interesting is just
lots and lots are happening from your side. Colin,
lots happening. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. Very interesting cool. to bring those examples, and we're really interested to seeing those new technologies and to have those new instruments, particularly in this region. But I think just to complete the whole angle of understanding the digital identity, Latifa, you have recently launched a very interesting, and we're very proud being Bahraini to have this on a national level, the eKYC platform. I would really love to understand from your perspective, what has been your experience in that? What is the adoption rate, or how the market was receptive to this eKYC, and what is the importance of the eKYC to Bahrain, for example?
Yeah, so Khalid, I think pre-COVID, a number of financial institutions had long-term digital transformation plans. But when the pandemic came, it turned everything upside down. So today, serving your customer digitally or remotely is no longer a choice across various sectors, not only the financial sector. So we have seen banks who are completely digital with no physical premises, like Ella, for example, or MEEM. We have seen conventional banks moving towards digital offering like Jazeel and so many other banks. So the importance of digital identity became pretty much, I would say, obvious to support that and to adapt to this robust change. And we have a number of financial institutions that utilize the digital onboarding and that needs the digital onboarding to avail their services like instant account opening and credit facilities remotely. So you rarely need to visit a physical premises today, like what Shariq mentioned. To complete any transaction, you can completely transact online. And from this need, we have identified a gap in the market because The KYC process used to be hectic. I mean, lots of identification documents are required, lots of verifications is done, lots of manual entry was done. So we, as Benefit, an operator of the service in partnership with the Information and E-Government Authority as a data provider, and under the supervision of the Central Bank of Bahrain, launched this eKYC platform, which is a single digital platform to serve all the needs of the financial industry when it comes to digital onboarding, meeting their KYC regulatory requirements, and enhancing their customer experience and due diligence. Now, we have seen in Bahrain that we do have an infrastructure of data repository that sits with the Information and E-Government Authority. It is the data about citizens and residents in Bahrain. And we thought of extending this infrastructure to the financial sector to fulfill the KYC requirements. So this was the idea. Now we have seen a great adoption by banks and financial institutions to the service because it made their life simply easier than before. It is completely integrated with their core banking system and their electronic channels using state-of-art technologies like advanced sets of APIs, cloud computing for hosting, and blockchain for sharing the data among financial institutions. So this was the idea and this was the benefits. Now, I mean, we have in Bahrain sort of digital identity when it comes to eKey, for example. The concept of eKey in Bahrain, which is the single sign-on for authentication that we use to transact the government transaction. And it's used kind of very advanced security of biometric fingerprint authentication to protect your identity. So this is one of the things that Bahrain have moved ahead when it comes to digital identity. We have another example of the legislation that came recently for the digital signature. So this will enable customers to digitally authenticate themselves and be able to sign documents, contracts, checks remotely and digitally in a way that is recognized by law just as the wet signature is. So this will also help further in digitizing the end-to-end services and processes.
Very interesting, Latifa. So maybe I would use this, as a segue, just to jump to my other question. I just wanted to understand what are the current services out in the market, and maybe if you can, just share more elaboration when it comes to the e-signature, for example, and how that is relevant to the digital identity, and how would that add value to the entire ecosystem and the country?
Yes, we have seen various, I would say, digital identity solutions and digital identity efforts in the region. I can say that UAE has moved forward with their UAE Pass as a digital identity. KSA started with Abshir, for example, as a kind of mechanism to identify yourself digitally. And we in Bahrain are using the eKYC service along with the eKey authentication to provide this sort of digital identity. So this kind of infrastructure created an ecosystem where you can digitize the services. Now, when it comes to signing the contract, which comes at the end of the process of any financial service, if it's an account opening or lending service or any financial service, you will need the customer to come to the branch and physically sign. That was before the legislation of the digital signature. Today, there is this kind of infrastructure being built up by Benefit for digital signature, especially for checks trading, which will be extended as a service for other use cases of digital signature as well.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I think that altogether that brings the value to all of us as individuals first, right? I think that would make our life easier, much easier when it comes to opening bank account, to accessing any finance or accessing any service. It's not, and not necessarily, for example, it's a financial services or banking. I believe this whole shift would move into other ecosystems or other industries as well. And I believe the entire world is moving towards what they call the digital economy, where basically all different industries will become more of an ecosystem. And that's where we need those instruments, from the fintech, from the regulators, from the national players to bring and to construct such an ecosystem to make life easier to individuals and users, institutions, and regulators as well. So Shariq and Colin, I think Latifa, she talked about really interesting development out in the market, what's happening. We understand there are different initiatives. For example, in the GCC, UAE, they have the passport, the passport pass, or Saudi, they have the Abshir, they have their own mechanism. Lots and lots are happening around us. How would you gauge what's happening out in the markets? What are the developments out there versus the adoption, for example, and what's happening in this region? I know you guys, you have been out in the market with clients, with deployments. You are having your really hand in that process. So please share with us what's happening out there.
Sure. So Daon is a global company with over 200 customers in financial services across every continent. So as a result of that, we've seen all sorts of requirements, regulatory requirements, technology requirements, innovation requirements from all different jurisdictions. But really, when it comes down to it, each organization is trying to address three factors when it comes to digital onboarding. And they can be neatly grouped into, number one, removing friction from customer journeys without sacrificing security, privacy of data, things like that. And number two, meet their compliance requirements. So there's always a regulator there, and there's always legislation that they need to comply with. And number three, to increase the conversion rates of new customers. So the customer experience is key to the success of any digital onboarding or eKYC biometric solution. So it's all about getting new customers in, getting them onboarded, and getting them transacting with relative ease. And it goes back to the first point, removing friction. So as Latifa said, the COVID situation has accelerated digital transformation across most organizations in our experience. Any organization that had a digital onboarding capability going into the pandemic was best positioned to take full advantage. We had a lot of interactions with customers looking to scale up, because initially digital onboarding was targeted at unique subgroups, millennials or technologically forward-looking subgroups of people. So it was only sized or dimensioned to address perhaps 10–20% of their overall applicant process. Whereas now, in some instances, it's become 100% of their customer interaction engagement channels. So as a result, they've needed to scale up, and with scaling up comes issues around privacy, security, and all those types of areas. So these are the challenges we're helping our customers address. They are having to interact with their regulator more. Some jurisdictions had regulations in place, a lot didn't. An example would be in Japan in 2018, they recently started working on their regulations, and they created a new set of guidelines, which basically, from a digital KYC perspective, came down to strong controls in relation to selfie capture, in relation to facial matching, in relation to identity creation, so OCRing the identity document. Luckily in Japan, they had a very good identity card, which was easily OCR'd. The EU is a good example as well. And the EU operates under what we call Payment Service Directive 2. So there is actually a EU-wide set of regulations, but each jurisdiction is allowed to implement them in their own way or add to them. So for example, Germany requires the video call while onboarding. That video call is in addition to selfie capture, ID capture, facial matching, and so forth. So it's an extra step. It slows down the process a little, but it's quite robust as well. Canada recently as well, they implemented new guidelines for KYC, again requiring strong facial liveness and strong authentication, so facial matching with a certified liveness detection capability. Common across all jurisdictions we're seeing really is a deep focus on the controls that are implemented. And the regulator would obviously like to see more and more strong controls. However, we as vendors and customer service operations, we want to see the customer experience being as nice and easy for users as possible. So it's always a balancing act, being able to dial up your security controls and dial down maybe certain other controls to find a harmonious balance of easy customer journey, yet still strong in terms of the assurance of the data. And then a final point on that is what we're seeing across, and I'll talk about this a bit more perhaps later, is the convergence of national identity solutions with financial institutions. An example would be in South Africa, where the issuer of the national identity document is a system called HANIS. They've opened up a service which banks or any other institution can leverage to check the data that it takes from its users. So an image of a document, OCR the data, is verified against the issuer of the document, and then within the central system you can match all the data is matched from the source to the real ID. The person's face is matched with the source ID that's logged against that image, and so on. So we're seeing this start to take hold around various jurisdictions, and it's a good, robust, secure process for digital.
It's more of centralized, platforms having a play to facilitate this whole thing. Shariq, from your perspective, regionally here, are we in line with the global trend and developments? Are we behind? Are we there yet?
So absolutely, I think what Colin mentioned, we are seeing a similar global trend being followed within the region as well. But let me highlight 2 or 3 important aspects here, right? When you talk about adoption has a couple of variables and factors that influence your rate of adoption, right? And in my previous answer, I did mention or hinted upon a balancing act between a controlled environment, which is led by the regulatory bodies and the government agencies, and the customer experience that the bankers and us as fintechs wants to provide, right? Now, because it's a new phenomena, um, I see a lot of passion behind it. I see a lot of the entire ecosystem trying to move in that direction. I can see momentum there. But at the same time, there are realistic challenges and constraints that we need to be also aware of, right? Now, let's take the first component, which is your regulatory environments, right? Now, again, innovation by definition means something that has not been done before, which means that it can introduce new risks. It can potentially cause threat to your identity, your data, and hence, how do we work together? It's not a responsibility of the regulator itself to come up with regulations and then enforce it to the banking community. I think the trend is changing. What I'm seeing is that where we co-develop or we co-innovate or we discuss together and mutually agree what the framework, or we have a say at least, an input into that whole process of the control environment, right? I mean, I myself, for example, went to the CBB number of times when we were launching the first digital identity onboarding process in Bahrain back in 2018. And I was pleasantly surprised to see the open mindedness, the ability to welcome new innovation. And as Latifa mentioned, same is happening in KSA, same is happening in Kuwait, for example, PASI in Kuwait or Abshar in Saudi Arabia. I think they're all moving in that direction. So it gives a lot of comfort to me as a fintech to say that the region is aligned to the global adoption. The challenges are there, which is the second part, right? How do you manage that customer experience? How do you talk practically and say, well, the technology is fantastic. We all agree the technology is there. But we also understand the banking world exists for the last 100 years, right? The bank, and there is legacy. We have to admit, we cannot deny the fact there is legacy. And in order to shift from that legacy infrastructure and architecture and cumbersome processes that has been built over a period of time to a completely new phenomena. We're talking about moving from physical identity to digital identity. That may look very simple, but that's a huge shift. That's a game changer. It comes with its own challenges. Control environment, controls and regulations is one stuff, but banks itself their architecture, their infrastructure, their legacy processes, it does take time. So to summarize, if I want to summarize, I would say that the good thing is the momentum is there. A lot of players and the ecosystem has come together to drive this momentum. The adoption is taking place, but at the same time, there are challenges and constraints which is slowing us down. Organizations such as Benefit, Aion, Daon coming together can actually help that reduce that friction and reduce that pain of moving from legacy to new, right? I think that is an important aspect that we will all have to understand, right? That is the practical way. You ask any banker, you ask anyone in technology, for example, working for an organization, you will see a consistent theme. We have legacy, we have constraints, we are pulled back because of underlying processes which has built over a period of time, right? But I think it's very encouraging to see a lot of people talking in the same language. We are seeing banks starting to take on that, being a brave, it's a brave move to say we are going to move away, right? The choice, and we all understand the choice. The choice is not to do nothing. The choice is either you move and adopt or you vanish, right? So the mindset which is changing, and it's very hard. It's very heartening to see that.
And it is very important, Shariq, I completely agree. I think it's very important to acknowledge, the status that we have right now with all of the legacy, with all of the drivers and all the challenges. I think that's the starting point to acknowledge, to understand, and absolutely having the shared kind of benefits or the direction, for example, different, the regulatory, play and drivers, the national players, benefits, for example, Daon, Aion. I think it's very important to have that consortium, if you will, to bring the pain points and to address that in a doable and in a practical fashion. So Shariq, when we talk about Aion, I know for a fact that Aion is committed, for example, to introduce 2 million customers via platform banking. So can you share from your perspective, what shall we expect out in the market and what is the impact that's going to bring out?
Thank you, Khalid. Very, very interesting space, right? Aion is not a typical software provider. We are not a typical IT shop, right? And it's very important to understand the difference here. We are a platform company who provides digital banking solutions. So what we call digital bank in a box, right? In a very simple terms that everybody can understand. And when you talk about we are committed to introduce 2 million customers through platform banking, it involves a number of things or components coming together to provide that unanimous, standardized customer experience, starting from onboarding all the way to post onboarding components, right? And that includes not just retail banking but also corporate and investment banking, right? It's very important to understand because obviously there is a big difference between retail banking customers and corporate banking customers and the way digital identity is handled in both these cases. So what we are really saying is platform implementation is one thing, making a brave move and trying to move away from legacy and adopting digital phenomena is one thing, but then adopting and ensuring that your customers are actually adopting that platform and doing the banking services rather than just opening an account and then doing nothing is key for us, right? Which means that you need to have very rich banking services. When we talk about payments, for example, we talk about card services, we talk about loans, we talk about the entire financing element around that, right? It is a pain. We all understand it is a pain today, right? You apply for a loan, and I'm not going to name anything, any organization here, but I'm saying banking in general, right? We all know it is thing of the past in the form and shape that exists today. And where Aion comes in is by saying we want to enhance that customer experience while maintaining the balance to ensure data protection, identity protection is there, and to increase that digital banking phenomena where people, the customers, can actually do their banking requirements and needs by sitting at their own convenience, yeah, by sitting at their own houses, for example, right? So new initiatives that are coming in and watch the space. It's growing, it's evolving on a daily basis. We are talking about AI based onboarding, eKYC, right? AI based payments. We are talking about personal financial management. We are talking about open banking. Now these are not just headlines. These are not just one words, right? I mean, open banking. If I can talk about it, it will take hours. Bahrain has launched and is pioneers in launching open banking initiatives. Saudi is following. UAE and Oman is also in line, and that will really change the way banking is done, right? I mean, the way data aggregation is happening, the day payment initiation is happening, right? The whole infrastructure and ecosystem coming together and consolidating the infrastructure available within the GCC region, right? Similarly, we talk about AI-based payments, right? Payments today, we all know, we have all seen the pain, right? We all know when you make, very simple, when you make an international transfer, how long does it take? How much do you get charged? You know, do you know where do you have visibility where your payment is? Do you know who is making money on your money? All these are open questions, right?
Right, right, right.
And again, we are here to change the way these things happen. We are here to make customer first phenomena, and also ensuring that we maintain the right balance between protecting the identity versus the innovation that we can do. So watch the space, it's coming.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Shariq. Very interesting. Really very, very interesting. And again, looking at this being an individual or an end user, I think we really appreciate the convenience of having such a channel and instrument to complete all of our banking needs or financial services needs right from our mobile device, for example. I think that's something really we appreciate as end user, but really that means lots and lots of technology and backstage work needs to be done and completed to make that service available in the right manner, in a secure manner, in the right orchestration, right? So I think overall, I would say briefly, the digital identity and the digital onboarding and the digital banking overall is really a necessity. It's not a choice. It's not something that's a bonus or an addition, but that becomes very a necessity and part of our day-to-day life. And I understand from Latifa, the adoption rate is quite phenomenal, and lots and lots of banks and institutions are following the eKYC platform launched by the Benefit. Latifa, if I would, and of course, I think there are always room for improvement. So let me put it this way: if there are something to be advanced from the regulatory perspective to expand the adoption in Bahrain, from your experience, from your perspective, do you think there's a room, and what are the things that could happen to accelerate the adoption in Bahrain?
Yeah, so Khalid, thankfully, we were ready even before the pandemic to cater for digital onboarding. Benefit initiative in eKYC and Aion initiative in digital identity onboarding has played a role in the transformation plan of the financial sector, and it's streamlined lots of processes and facilitates, seamless onboarding. One of the very important things that I want to highlight is the financial inclusion. And with this digital onboarding today, we are able to onboard even the blue-collared, I would say, residents to open financial accounts. Previously, those people didn't have their identity with them. They didn't have their passports with them. They didn't have their proof of address with them. So it was challenging for them to obtain facilities by the banking industry. Today, we do have the infrastructure to serve them and include them in this inclusion goal, I would say. So I think this is a quantum leap for Bahrain to lead in the eKYC and digital onboarding, and it was adapted not by banks only. We have seen also payment service providers, we have seen money changers, we have seen investment firms and fintech players adopting to the solution that we have in the market. On a national level, I saw the regulator approving remote customer verification through video call or facial recognition, which is an advantage, again, for us in this region to have such mechanisms of authentications between financial industry. But I think it's the push. We need to push everyone towards digital onboarding and digitizing their services. And I agree with.
I think we lost Latifa for a few moments, but interesting. I think it's Latifa, interesting. Absolutely, we witnessed actually, and we can see the development happening in Bahrain particularly, and in the GCC, and absolutely the adoption is quite phenomenal, not only on the banking side, but the fintech and the rest of the players in the market. Absolutely, we can see that, and we really look forward to see the adoption rates just as much as the developed countries, where we can bring in the new solutions, the new services, the new customer experience, not to facilitate only and make the life of end users easier, but also to scale businesses, to
Yes.
increase the. We're having Latifa back, not yet. So I think it's a bigger picture, not only the business side, but also the regulatory, the privacy, the security. Colin, I have to get back to you. I have this question in mind, and I really wanted to pick your brain on what are the trends, what's happening really out in the market. We can see the facial recognition. Anything new that we should expect very soon in the near future? And what do you think those new technologies or solutions that would really bring the digital identity to its maximum potential, at least to the knowledge that we have and the solutions and techy things we have available?
Sure. So, to reiterate, the most notable and impactful trend certainly it's been the adoption in the last year. We've seen a rise in adoption that really we wouldn't have seen for 3 to 4 years without the pandemic. So how do we take advantage of that? Well, the key is obviously everything we spoke about before, improving the technology, finding that balance between security and convenience. And then, exposing new capabilities as well as they come on stream, be it from device vendors or from algorithm providers or people like ourselves, for example. And what those trends are leading towards is a convergence, essentially, of digital identities being supported not only by banks or governments, but by a combination. I'll give you an example, would be the Real ID program in New Zealand, which is a joint venture between their national ID provider, the government essentially, and a leading bank, their Kiwi Bank. So as you apply for this Real ID, it is a digital token. However, it does come with a physical card as well if you want that. And that allows you to interact with numerous services, be they citizen services from government or the banking services from not only the bank which provides the solution, but any of the banks that are participating. We also see Bank ID in Sweden is one of the oldest of this type of what we would call bring your own identity solutions, BYOI, in the context of bring your something solutions. And that's essentially the same thing. It's a digital credential, which is used to access a range of services from both banks and governments. And this is coming from an alliance of banks within Sweden. And this goes back well before the advent of smartphones and things like that. So it's now getting up to speed with the digital onboarding and digital biometric authentication, similar to the UAE pass that Latifa mentioned as well. So these are all solutions which we see having a lot of potential for interacting not only with your banks but with governments as well. And it's a combination of the best of breed technologies and guidelines, policies from both of these organizations. What this is all leading to ultimately is identity as a service. And Latifa spoke very well about what Benefit are providing, which is very similar. We also have an example in Japan, which is essentially a large identity as a service provider. And that provides both eKYC, biometric authentication, and then various niche cases specific to the Japanese market, one of which is pay by face. So it's users can just go into a shop and present their face, and it's matched against the gallery, and they're able to pay without any interaction, and it's all fast, seamless, etc. So that's a cloud-based service. It's identity as a service. It avoids silos of information, and it creates a centralized national infrastructure, which can be used for a range of identity services, not just in financial services, but also in government. Back to you. I think you're muted, Khaled.
Yes, I was on mute. So very interesting. And lots of things are becoming as a service. So everything is becoming as a service. I think that's the trend, and that's part of the digital transformation. So really interesting discussion. Thank you very much for all of the discussion points that you brought together and you participated. Let me just open up the floor for some questions from the audience. Now, before talking about that, I think I've always thought about my father's generation. They lived pre-oil, and they're very lucky to go through such a dramatic shift pre-oil until now, where everything is digital. I wonder how the next 10, 20 years are going to look like. I would love to have such a dramatic shift and to see really new things that we cannot define right now. We talk about digital transformation. We talk about the next generation banking and financial services. I would love to witness those days, but let's see. Getting older, I need to use my glasses. Pardon me. Let me try to pick up some of the questions here. So let me start with this. What are the ideal measures? I'll take this for Shariq. What are the ideal measures need to be embedded to ensure the data confidentiality during the eKYC process? So what are the ideal measures that we need to have throughout the process?
Right, and Colin, feel free to jump in, but I think
Sure.
Very important, we are talking about protecting the overall identity of the customer, and data obviously is part of that, right? How we have adopted technology to do that, obviously we are using a standard mechanism that is deployed on airports, for example, where you're using the MRZ data strip, right, at the back of your passport. So all we are doing is, and that has a security in terms of the parity checks and all the other kind of checks that are already built into the barcode, right? So what we are doing is we are reading the data from the barcode, and we are also reading the OCR, the visual image on the ID cards and the passports, and we are cross-validating the data sets. That's number one, right? How do you, so first of all, your starting position is a validated data, which is part of the magnetic strip. That is your starting position. Very important to understand that. And then you're saying that you are taking it one step further by saying that you are actually cross-validating for any forgery or any fraudulent activity between the two data sets. That's the second step. Then you go one step further and you say, in the entire structured template that you are capturing the data from, which is the passport or the ID card, is it any forgery happening, such as photo substitution, right? If somebody's changing your picture, or somebody's changing your visual zone, or somebody's trying to replicate or create a forged identity, right? So we have about 8 to 10 different controls, underlying controls, which is over and above what controls exist today within the branch, to ensure that the entire identity, which includes the data identity as well, or data sets as well, is also secured, right? So that's a short reply. Colin, feel free to jump in if you.
No, I think you encompassed pretty much the essence of the question there. It's strong identity assurance coupled with ongoing capabilities to continually provide that assurance.
Right. Thank you very much. So let me go to the second question. Right now, with the presence or the availability of the traditional ID cards that we have, in every single country. So a question open for the floor. So do you think it's easier and swifter to have a combination of the traditional IDs mixed or combined with the digital identity? Does it make it easier to verify, to use, to deploy? What do you think, guys?
I think I can start, and then feel free, Colin and Latifa, to join. that there needs to be a clarity here, right? We are actually talking about physical card itself having a digital footprint. We are not talking about a digital card here, right? So we are still using the physical card. We are still using your ID cards in Bahrain, for example, CPR, or in Kuwait, for example, the civil ID or the passports, which is a physical document. But what we are actually saying is that how do we convert that physical ID cards into your digital identity, right? Rather than creating a digital identity document which is separate than the physical identity. So in essence, Khalid, we are actually using a combination of both. We are using the physical card to create a digital identity out of that, right?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to
Absolutely.
clarify that.
Absolutely. And I think it's just, the set of data. I think at the end of the day, if you think about it, I think it's a set of data which identify the individuals, right? And different forms. It can be printed on a piece of paper or on a piece of plastic, or it can be presentable in a digital manner. And how that can be, right now we have this existing, fashion or model that we use. Maybe in 10 years or 20 years, that could be something completely different from what we have right now. So
And
thank you very much for
Khalid,
that.
if I may add to this question,
Yes.
yeah, I think one of the beauty features of the eKYC is that it retrieves the data from the original source, being the government entity. So if your card is lost or expired, or it might have some obsolete sets of data, the data will be retrieved from the origin. So you will not need to carry your ID and I mean update your ID just to get a financial service. You will be absolutely able to avail a financial service.
Absolutely. Agree, Latifa. And good to have you back. And here's the question for you. So one of the questions is, what are the biggest barriers to getting banks on board with the digital onboarding and your perspective? Any barriers there?
I
And what are
think
those?
Shariq perfectly shed the light on that previously. It's the legacy system that some banks have. I mean, it is difficult for some bank to have a change, to have such a dramatic transformation to digital onboarding. I mean, the tools, solutions, and techniques are all available. We do have a number of solutions for identity authentication and verification. We have the eKYC platform. We have the infrastructure there. But, this move from a legacy process to completely digital process, it takes time, it takes a change in mindset, it takes strategic actions to do so.
Thank you very much, Latifa. Very interesting. I know we are running a bit over the time. I promise I have two questions. Very interesting discussion. I don't want to miss those two questions, and I promise we will come to a closure. So one of the questions is, probably this is for Colin. What about in twins cases?
Sure. Yeah. So very, very simply, in digital onboarding and customer authentication, we're talking about what we call a one-to-one match. So my face versus my passport's face. Okay. In the case of a twin, if I have a perfectly identical twin, then his face is going to match my passport's face. And that's the essence of the question here. So the answer to the twin case is essentially a multi-factor approach. So if I'm concerned that my evil twin is going to access my bank account, I can add an additional factor, and that can be a PIN. So a traditional 4 or 6-digit PIN, whatever. I could also use my voice. As we're twins, our voices won't be the same, but our fingerprints and our face will mostly be similar depending on the types of twins. So the answer is, as Apple put it when they launched Face ID, was just hope you don't have an evil twin.
Very true, very true. And I think just to have one more question from one of our audience here. So the question is more about, probably we have covered onboarding customers. Maybe during the conversation, we didn't specify whether that's a new customer or an existing customer to the bank. So the question is more about how would the existing services out in the market are addressing the existing customers. So those are existing customers already defined, known to the businesses and institutions. How do we bring them to the digital experience or the digital world? Would you like to take that, Latifa or Colin?
Sure, I'll have a crack at it first. So yeah, you know, sometimes there's a need for someone to re-authenticate or resubmit their identification documents. That might be a person who had no intention of ever coming down this digital channel, and now they're presented with this technology. So from our experience working with customers, what we do is we define a baseline. The technology must be usable by everyone, not just millennials, not just, you know, technically minded people. So it's tested to the nth degree. The feedback we supply to the users is basic and simple. We try and guide our users with Rails through the process to make it as easy as possible, and emphasize the benefits to the person. You don't have to go into a branch. The branches are closed, it's far away. In terms of people who just refuse to maybe go down the smartphone channel or a PC, there are options for a non-smartphone oriented world using, as I said earlier, multi-factor approach through voice biometrics or fingerprints or things like that. So it's basically about providing a range of options to your users so that any user can choose a channel or a preferred method that suits them.
I think, Colin, it's easier to digitize the services for existing customers because you know them, they have the credentials for your e-banking. And we have seen banks always start with digitizing their services to their existing customer and then move to the new customers.
Very good. Yeah,
very true, Latifa. And I think it's just a necessity to take them from where they are right now to the digital new world, to open up new services and new products for the existing customers. Otherwise, if they remain where they are, they would be limited to what's traditional banking or services out in the market. Well, I apologize. We have been a bit running over the time, but really enjoy the discussion. Thank you very much, Colin, Latifa, and Shariq. Thank you all for joining us today, and it was really a pleasure to moderate this interesting discussion. And hopefully, I look forward to meeting you again in some different topics and discussions. So from AionDigital, thank you very much. Have a great day, and see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you all. Thank you.